In the scorching heat of Afghanistan's Helmand province, a $30 million Apache attack helicopter sat grounded like a wounded giant. For 3 weeks, the most skilled mechanics, engineers, and technical specialists had tried everything they knew. The machine that was supposed to be the backbone of coalition air support had become a million-pound paperweight. Soldiers on the ground were dying while waiting for air cover that wouldn't come. The Taliban grew bolder with each passing day, knowing one of the most feared weapons in the sky was out of commission. Morale plummeted as mission after mission was cancelled or postponed. Then, when all hope seemed lost and headquarters was ready to write off the aircraft entirely, the base commander made a desperate decision. He reached back into the past, calling upon a man who had been forgotten by the system but remembered by those who knew what real expertise looked like. What happened next would become the stuff of military legend, proving that sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones with the newest training or the highest ranks, but those with the rarest gift of all, the ability to understand machines like they have souls. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base. Chapman as Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Mitchell climbed out of her Apache AH-64D longbow for what she thought would be a routine post-mission inspection. The helicopter had performed flawlessly during the night reconnaissance mission over the Kunar Valley, but something felt different as she powered down the twin turboshaft engines. There was an unusual vibration during the final approach, barely noticeable but enough to trigger her pilot instincts. Sarah had been flying Apaches for 8 years, accumulating over 2,000 flight hours in some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. She knew every sound, every sensation, every subtle change in the aircraft's behavior. The Apache was more than just a machine to her, it was an extension of her own body, a finely tuned instrument of precision warfare that had saved countless lives and completed dozens of critical missions. As the rotor blade slowly wound down, Sergeant First Class Mike Rodriguez, the crew chief responsible for maintaining Sarah's bird, approached with his usual clipboard and pre-flight checklist. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran with hands that seemed to understand machinery on a molecular level. If there was something wrong with an Apache, he would find it. "How'd she handle tonight, Chief?" Rodriguez asked, running his experienced eyes over the aircraft's exterior. He had noticed the same subtle vibration during the landing sequence and was already mentally cataloging potential causes. "Something's off with the tail rotor assembly," Sarah replied, pulling off her flight helmet and wiping sweat from her forehead. "Started about halfway through the mission. Very slight, but it's there." Rodriguez nodded and immediately began his detailed inspection. The Apache AH-64D was one of the most complex machines ever created, with over 2.3 million parts working in perfect harmony to create the world's most advanced attack helicopter. Every component had to function flawlessly because in combat situations, mechanical failure wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. Within 2 hours, Rodriguez had identified the problem. The tail rotor gearbox was showing signs of unusual wear patterns, and several bearings were producing metal shavings that shouldn't have been there. The helicopter was officially grounded pending a complete gearbox replacement. What seemed like a straightforward maintenance issue quickly evolved into something much more complicated. The replacement gearbox arrived within 48 hours, flown in from the main supply depot in Kuwait. Rodriguez and his team of experienced mechanics began the complex process of removing the old unit and installing the new one. The procedure should have taken 12 hours with a crew of 4 specialists. But, when they fired up the engines for the first test run, the same vibration appeared. If anything, it was worse than before. The new gearbox was producing the exact same symptoms as the old one. Rodriguez double-checked every connection, every bolt, every seal. Everything was installed according to the technical manual specifications, but the Apache still refused to fly properly. Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, received the maintenance report with growing concern. Chapman was a small forward operating base that relied heavily on Apache support for daily operations. Without their attack helicopter providing close air support and reconnaissance capabilities, ground missions became exponentially more dangerous. Other bases in the region were already operating at maximum capacity with their own Apache fleets, leaving Chapman essentially blind and defenseless from the air. The third day brought a team of specialized technicians from the manufacturer's field service division. These were the experts who designed and built the Apache systems, men with decades of experience troubleshooting the most complex mechanical problems. They arrived with diagnostic equipment worth more than most people's houses and confidence that bordered on arrogance. "We'll have this bird back in the air by tomorrow afternoon," announced Dr. James Chen, the lead engineer. Chen had a PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT and had worked on Apache development for 15 years. He'd seen every possible mechanical failure and had developed solutions for problems that other engineers said were impossible to solve. The diagnostic equipment revealed something puzzling. All the sensors, computers, and mechanical systems were functioning within normal parameters. The tail rotor gearbox was operating exactly as designed, with proper oil pressure, temperature, and rotation speeds. Yet the vibration persisted, and, more troubling, it seemed to be getting progressively worse with each test run. Dr. Chen and his team spent 4 days running every conceivable test. They replaced the entire tail rotor assembly, swapped out the drive shaft, changed the transmission fluid 3 times, and even brought in a new set of rotor blades. Each modification temporarily reduced the vibration, but, within hours of operation, the problem returned with increasing severity. The manufacturer's team was baffled. According to every instrument, every computer diagnostic, and every technical manual, the Apache should have been flying perfectly. Yet something fundamental was wrong, something that defied conventional troubleshooting methods. By the end of the first week, tensions at Chapman were rising. Ground patrols were operating without air support, and the Taliban had noticed. Improvised explosive device attacks increased by 300% as enemy forces grew bolder, knowing that the devastating Apache couldn't respond to calls for assistance. 3 soldiers had been wounded in ambushes that could have been prevented with proper air cover. Colonel Harrison found himself facing an impossible situation. His most critical asset was grounded indefinitely, his soldiers were at increased risk, and the experts who were supposed to fix the problem were admitting defeat. The manufacturer's team packed up their equipment and flew back to their comfortable offices, leaving behind only a lengthy report that essentially concluded the Apache should be working but wasn't. The second week brought a new team of experts from the Army's Aviation and Missile Research, Development and Engineering Center. These were the military's own specialists, officers and civilians who understood Apache systems from a tactical perspective rather than just a manufacturing one. Surely they would identify what the civilian contractors had missed. Major Patricia Williams led this new team with systematic military precision. She had overseen Apache maintenance operations across 3 theaters of combat and had never encountered a mechanical problem that couldn't be solved with proper analysis and determination. Her approach was methodical and thorough, leaving nothing to chance. Williams ordered a complete disassembly of the aircraft's entire drivetrain system. Every component was inspected, measured, tested, and compared against factory specifications. The team worked 18-hour days, determined to restore Chapman's air support capability before more soldiers were killed or wounded. But, after 6 days of intensive work, Williams reached the same conclusion as Dr. Chen's team. Every component was functioning properly, yet the Apache remained unflyable. The vibration had actually worsened during their testing, progressing from a minor annoyance to a dangerous condition that threatened the structural integrity of the entire aircraft. The third week brought desperation. Colonel Harrison was receiving daily pressure from higher headquarters to explain why his base's Apache remained grounded. Other bases were being forced to provide air support for Chapman's area of operations, stretching already thin resources and leaving gaps in coverage elsewhere. Captain Lisa Torres, a young pilot who had been Sarah Mitchell's co-pilot on dozens of missions, suggested something that everyone else had overlooked. "What if we're looking at this wrong?" she asked during one of the daily briefings. "What if the problem isn't mechanical at all?" "What do you mean?" Colonel Harrison asked, willing to consider any possibility at this point. "What if it's something environmental? Something about this specific location, this specific aircraft, interacting with conditions we haven't considered? I know it sounds crazy, but we've ruled out everything else." Dr. Chen, who had remained at Chapman to continue monitoring the situation, shook his head dismissively. "Environmental factors are accounted for in the design specifications. The Apache operates successfully in similar conditions at dozens of other bases. But Captain Torres had planted a seed of doubt. That evening, Sarah Mitchell found herself standing beside her grounded Apache in the growing darkness, trying to understand what had gone wrong with the machine that had been her trusted partner for so many missions. The helicopter looked perfect from the outside. Every surface had been cleaned and polished during the various repair attempts. The rotors were properly positioned, the weapons systems were intact, and all the external components appeared to be in flawless condition. Yet she knew that somewhere within the complex maze of mechanical systems, something was fundamentally wrong. As she walked around the aircraft, Sarah noticed something that none of the technical experts had mentioned in their reports. The vibration wasn't just affecting the tail rotor assembly. If she placed her hand on different parts of the fuselage, she could feel subtle variations in the resonance patterns. It was almost as if the entire aircraft was trying to shake itself apart from the inside. That observation would prove to be more significant than anyone realized at the time. But, for now, the Apache remained grounded, the experts remained baffled, and Chapman's soldiers remained vulnerable. What everyone needed was someone who understood helicopters not just as collections of parts and specifications, but as living entities with their own mysterious behaviors. Unknown to anyone at Chapman, that someone was about to receive a phone call that would bring him back into a world he thought he had left behind forever. 3,000 miles away from the heat and chaos of Afghanistan, retired Master Sergeant Tom Kowalski was enjoying what had become his daily ritual. Every morning at precisely 0600 hours, he would walk to the end of his small dock on Lake Erie, cast his fishing line into the calm water, and spend the next 2 hours in peaceful silence. The military had trained that precision into him over 28 years of service, but retirement had taught him the value of quiet moments. Tom's small lakeside cottage was a stark contrast to the forward operating bases and maintenance hangars where he had spent most of his adult life. The walls were decorated with photographs from his military career, but they seemed like artifacts from another person's life now. He had been out of the army for almost 5 years, and most days he barely thought about helicopters, maintenance schedules, or the complex mechanical puzzles that had once defined his existence. The phone rang at 0847 hours, interrupting his morning solitude. Tom almost didn't answer. Very few people had his number, and most calls these days were either telemarketers or wrong numbers. But something made him reel in his line and walk back to the cottage. Tom Kowalski speaking, he answered in the clipped, professional tone that military service had permanently embedded in his voice. Master Sergeant Kowalski, this is Colonel James Harrison calling from Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan. I apologize for tracking you down like this, but we have a situation that requires your specific expertise. Tom felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had been a helicopter maintenance specialist for nearly 3 decades, specializing in the most complex mechanical problems that stumped everyone else. His reputation for solving impossible cases had made him legendary within the Army aviation community, but that life was supposed to be behind him now. Colonel, with respect, I've been retired for almost 5 years. I'm sure your maintenance teams are more than capable of handling whatever problems you're facing. Colonel Harrison's voice carried a note of desperation that Tom had heard before, usually right before someone asked him to perform a miracle. Sir, we have an Apache that's been grounded for 3 weeks. We've had civilian contractors from the manufacturer, military specialists from Amerdec, and our own experienced maintenance crews work on it. Nobody can figure out what's wrong. Tom walked to his living room window and stared out at the peaceful lake. In the distance, a small fishing boat moved slowly across the water, its occupant probably enjoying the same kind of tranquil morning that Tom had been savoring just minutes before. The contrast between that serenity and the urgent crisis unfolding in Afghanistan felt surreal. What are the symptoms? Tom asked, already knowing that he was going to regret getting involved. Tail rotor vibration that progressively worsens during operation. We've replaced the gearbox, the entire rotor assembly, the drive shaft, and pretty much every other component back there. All diagnostics show normal operation, but the bird won't fly. Tom had encountered similar problems during his career, but they usually had straightforward solutions once you understood the root cause. The fact that multiple expert teams had failed to identify the issue suggested something more complex than standard mechanical failure. Has anyone checked for harmonic resonance issues? Tom asked. I'm not sure what that means, sir. Can you explain? Tom smiled despite himself. This was exactly the kind of question that separated textbook knowledge from real-world experience. Harmonic resonance occurs when different mechanical systems interact in ways that amplify vibrations rather than dampening them. It's not something you can diagnose with standard equipment because everything appears to be functioning normally. There was silence on the other end of the line for several seconds. Then, Colonel Harrison spoke with renewed hope in his voice. Master Sergeant, I know you're retired and I have no authority to order you back to active duty. But, we have soldiers' lives at stake here, and, frankly, you're the only person anyone can think of who might be able to solve this problem. Tom closed his eyes and tried to imagine explaining to his wife Margaret that he was considering flying to Afghanistan to work on a helicopter. She had been remarkably patient during his military career, understanding that his specialized skills sometimes required him to travel to dangerous places on short notice. But, retirement was supposed to mean an end to those emergency calls. Colonel, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this anymore. It's been 5 years since I worked on an active Apache. The technology has probably advanced beyond my knowledge. Sir, the helicopter you'd be working on is a D-model longbow, manufactured in 2019. I'm told that's well within your area of expertise. Tom had to admit that the colonel was right. The AH-64D Apache longbow was a machine he knew intimately. He had worked on hundreds of them during his final years of active duty, and, despite technological improvements, the fundamental mechanical systems remained largely unchanged. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Tom asked, recognizing even as he spoke that he was moving from declining the offer to negotiating the details. We can have you on a flight tomorrow morning if you agree. Full contractor status, which means excellent compensation and complete authority over the maintenance operation. You'd have whatever resources you need and full support from the command structure. Tom walked back outside and sat down in the wooden chair where he spent most of his mornings. The lake was perfectly calm, reflecting the cloudless sky like a mirror. It was the kind of peaceful scene that he had dreamed about during those long, stressful years working in maintenance hangars under combat conditions. But, he also remembered the satisfaction of solving mechanical puzzles that had stumped everyone else. There was something deeply rewarding about understanding machines well enough to diagnose problems that couldn't be found through conventional methods. It was a skill that had taken decades to develop, and retirement had left that expertise unused. Colonel, can I call you back in 2 hours? I need to discuss this with my wife. Of course, sir. But, I hope you understand how urgent this situation is. Every day that Apache remains grounded puts more soldiers at risk. After hanging up the phone, Tom sat in silence for several minutes. He understood the weight of the decision he was facing. Accepting this assignment would mean returning to a world of pressure, danger, and complex problems. Declining would mean staying in his comfortable retirement while soldiers potentially died because an Apache couldn't provide the air support they needed. Margaret found him there an hour later, still staring at the lake with a troubled expression. She had known Tom for 35 years, married to him for 32, and she could read his moods better than he could himself. Let me guess, she said, settling into the chair beside him. The army needs you to fix something that nobody else can figure out. Tom smiled and took her hand. How did you know? Because you have that look on your face. The same one you got every time they called you away for one of your impossible projects. And, because honestly, Tom, you've been getting restless lately. Retirement suits you, but I can tell you missed the challenge. They talked for the next hour about the risks and benefits of accepting the assignment. Margaret worried about his safety, but she also understood that Tom's specialized knowledge represented a capability that couldn't be easily replaced. If his expertise could save soldiers' lives and restore critical military capability, she wouldn't stand in the way. When Tom called Colonel Harrison back, his decision was firm. Colonel, I'll take the assignment. But, I have some conditions. Name them. First, I want complete access to all maintenance records and diagnostic reports from the previous teams. Second, I need authority to modify or replace any component I deem necessary, regardless of cost. Third, I want a direct communication line to the aircraft manufacturer's engineering department. And, fourth, I need assurance that my recommendations will be implemented without interference from other experts who might disagree with my methods. Done. Can you be at Dover Air Force Base tomorrow morning? I'll be there. Tom spent the rest of the day preparing for a journey he never thought he would make again. He pulled out his old military maintenance manuals, updated his technical certifications, and mentally reviewed everything he knew about Apache helicopter systems. But, more than anything, he tried to prepare himself psychologically for returning to the high-pressure environment of combat zone maintenance operations. That evening, as he packed his tools and technical references, Tom reflected on the strange turns that life could take. 5 years ago, he had been eager to leave behind the stress and responsibility of military service. Now he was voluntarily returning to one of the most challenging mechanical problems of his career. The flight to Afghanistan would give him almost 24 hours to review the technical reports and develop preliminary theories about what might be causing the Apache's mysterious vibration problem. But Tom knew from experience that the most important diagnostic tool wouldn't be found in any manual or computer system. It would be his ability to listen to what the machine was trying to tell him. As the commercial airliner lifted off from Cleveland Hopkins International Airport the next morning, Tom watched Lake Erie disappear beneath the clouds. He was leaving behind the peaceful retirement that he had earned through 3 decades of service, but he was also returning to the work that had defined his professional identity. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, Tom opened the thick folder of maintenance reports that Colonel Harrison had provided. As he read through the detailed accounts of everything that had been tried and tested, a pattern began to emerge. Every expert team had focused on individual components and systems, but nobody had considered the possibility that the problem might involve interactions between multiple systems operating in ways that weren't anticipated by the original design specifications. By the time the plane landed in Kuwait for fuel and crew change, Tom had developed 3 possible theories about what might be causing the Apache's problems. More importantly, he had outlined a diagnostic approach that would test those theories systematically without duplicating the work that had already been done. The final leg of the journey, from Kuwait to Bagram Air Base and, then, by helicopter to Forward Operating Base Chapman, gave Tom his first taste of returning to a combat environment. The landscape below looked exactly as he remembered from previous deployments: harsh, unforgiving terrain that demanded absolute reliability from every piece of equipment. As Chapman came into view, Tom could see the grounded Apache sitting alone on the flight line, separated from the other aircraft like a patient in quarantine. From the air, the helicopter looked perfectly normal, but Tom knew that appearances could be deceiving when it came to complex mechanical systems. Colonel Harrison met Tom at the landing zone personally, a gesture that indicated just how desperate the situation had become. As they walked toward the maintenance hangar, the colonel briefed Tom on the tactical situation and the increased risks that Chapman's soldiers were facing without Apache support. "Master Sergeant, I want you to know that everyone here has complete confidence in your abilities. We've heard stories about some of the impossible problems you've solved in the past, and, frankly, we're counting on you to work another miracle." Tom nodded, but he was already focusing on the task ahead. Miracles were just problems that required unconventional thinking and a willingness to look beyond obvious explanations. If the Apache could be fixed, he would find a way to do it. The alternative was simply unacceptable. Tom Kowalski stood before the grounded Apache as the sun set over Forward Operating Base Chapman, casting long shadows across the flight line. The helicopter looked imposing even when motionless, its angular profile and weapon systems giving it an appearance of barely contained power. But Tom knew that beneath its intimidating exterior lay a complex mechanical puzzle that had stumped some of the most qualified technicians in the world. Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Mitchell approached with a mixture of hope and skepticism. She had heard stories about the legendary Master Sergeant Kowalski, but she had also watched 3 separate teams of experts fail to solve her helicopter's problem. Another consultant promising miraculous results seemed more like desperation than genuine hope. "Master Sergeant, I'm Sarah Mitchell, the pilot of this bird. I've been flying her for 2 years, and I can tell you that she was running perfectly until this vibration problem started. Whatever's wrong, it came on suddenly, during a routine mission. Tom nodded and began his initial inspection by simply walking around the aircraft, running his hands along various surfaces and listening carefully to the ambient sounds. This wasn't part of any technical manual, but 3 decades of experience had taught him that machines often revealed their secrets through subtle clues that instruments couldn't detect. "Tell me exactly what you felt when the problem first appeared," Tom requested, continuing his tactile examination of the airframe. "It started as a very slight vibration in the tail section during the final hour of a night reconnaissance mission. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make me notice it. By the time we landed, it was more pronounced, and when Sergeant Rodriguez ran the post-flight inspection, he could feel it through the fuselage." Tom paused at the tail rotor assembly, placing both hands on different parts of the structure and closing his eyes. He was feeling for vibration patterns, resonance frequencies, and any other physical evidence that might provide clues about the underlying problem. "Has anyone measured the vibration patterns across the entire airframe?" Tom asked. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward. "Sir, the manufacturer's team used accelerometers and spectrum analyzers to map vibrations throughout the aircraft. Everything appeared normal according to their instruments." Tom smiled slightly. "Instruments are excellent tools, but they only measure what they're designed to measure. Sometimes the most important information exists in the spaces between the measurements." Over the next 2 hours, Tom conducted what could only be described as a conversation with the Apache. He started the engines and listened to the subtle changes in sound as various systems came online. He monitored vibration patterns by touch, feeling for resonances and harmonic interactions that wouldn't show up on conventional diagnostic equipment. What he discovered contradicted everything that the previous teams had concluded. The vibration wasn't originating from the tail rotor gearbox at all. Instead, it was being transmitted there from somewhere else in the aircraft, amplified and focused by the specific harmonic frequencies of the tail section structure. "Shut her down," Tom called to Rodriguez after 20 minutes of engine operation. "I need to check something." As the engines wound down and the rotors stopped turning, Tom walked to the main rotor assembly and began a detailed examination of the swashplate mechanism. The swashplate was a complex system of hydraulic actuators and mechanical linkages that controlled the pitch of the rotor blades, allowing the pilot to maneuver the helicopter in any direction. "When was the last time anyone performed detailed maintenance on the main rotor head?" Tom asked. Chief Mitchell consulted her logbook. "The complete rotor head was overhauled 6 months ago during scheduled maintenance. Everything was replaced or rebuilt according to factory specifications." Tom nodded, but something in the maintenance records caught his attention. The overhaul had been performed at a depot facility using slightly different procedures than the original manufacturing specifications. The changes were minor and had been approved by the manufacturer, but Tom's experience suggested that even small modifications could sometimes create unexpected interactions. "I want to run a test that might seem unusual," Tom announced to the gathered maintenance team. "I'm going to start the engines and engage the rotor system, but I want everyone to position themselves at different points around the aircraft and pay attention to vibration patterns through the ground." The test revealed something remarkable. As the main rotor reached operational speed, the vibrations transmitted through the aircraft's structure created standing wave patterns in the ground beneath the helicopter. These patterns were invisible to instruments but clearly detectable by experienced mechanics who knew what to feel for. "The main rotor isn't balanced properly," Tom concluded. "But it's not a simple weight imbalance that would show up on standard equipment. It's a harmonic imbalance that only becomes apparent when the rotor interacts with the specific structural characteristics of this particular airframe." Dr. James Chen, who had remained at Chapman to monitor the situation, expressed immediate skepticism. "Master Sergeant, we tested the main rotor balance extensively. All parameters were within acceptable limits." Tom turned to face the engineer with a patient expression. "Doctor, you tested for static balance and dynamic balance using conventional methods. But what I'm seeing suggests a harmonic resonance problem that occurs only when multiple systems operate simultaneously under specific conditions." To prove his theory, Tom requested permission to perform a series of unconventional tests. First, he wanted to operate the main rotor at various speeds while the aircraft remained on the ground, measuring vibration transmission through the airframe structure. Second, he wanted to analyze the frequency spectrum of those vibrations using both instruments and human perception. The tests took place over the next 2 days, with Tom working alongside the existing maintenance team to gather data that had never been collected before. What emerged was a complex picture of harmonic interactions between the main rotor, the transmission system, the airframe structure, and even the tail rotor assembly. The key insight came when Tom realized that the maintenance overhaul 6 months earlier had made subtle changes to the rotor blade attachment points. The modifications were within specification and had been properly approved, but they had altered the harmonic characteristics of the rotor system in ways that weren't anticipated by the original design. Under normal operating conditions, these changes would have been irrelevant. But, when combined with the specific operational profile that Chapman's Apache had been flying, including extended periods at high altitude and aggressive maneuvering in mountainous terrain, the modified harmonic characteristics had gradually created a resonance condition that affected the entire aircraft. "It's like tuning a guitar," Tom explained to Colonel Harrison during a briefing on the 3rd day. "Every string has to be in harmony with every other string. Change the tension on one string, and it affects the whole instrument." The rotor blade modifications changed the harmonic tuning of this Apache in ways that created constructive interference patterns. The solution wasn't going to be simple or quick. Tom needed to either restore the original rotor blade configuration or modify other systems to compensate for the harmonic changes. The first option would require new rotor blades manufactured to the original specifications. The second option would require custom engineering work to retune the aircraft's structural characteristics. Given the urgent operational requirements at Chapman, Tom chose a third approach that combined elements of both solutions. He would modify the existing rotor blades to restore their original harmonic characteristics while simultaneously adjusting the tail rotor system to compensate for any remaining imbalances. The work required precision that went beyond normal maintenance procedures. Tom spent hours measuring and adjusting individual components, making modifications that were measured in thousandths of an inch. Each change required testing to ensure that it moved the overall system toward harmonic balance rather than creating new problems. Sarah Mitchell watched the process with growing amazement. She had never seen anyone approach helicopter maintenance with such intuitive understanding of how mechanical systems interacted. Tom seemed to hear things in the engine noise that nobody else detected and feel vibrations that instruments couldn't measure. "How do you know when you've got it right?" she asked during one of the testing sessions. Tom paused and smiled. "The machine tells you. When everything is in harmony, the whole aircraft feels different. The vibrations don't fight against each other anymore. They work together instead of creating destructive interference." By the end of the 5th day, Tom was ready for the critical test. The Apache had been modified in ways that no technical manual described, using techniques that couldn't be found in any engineering textbook. But Tom was confident that the harmonic balance had been restored. The ground test was successful. For the first time in almost a month, the Apache ran without the mysterious vibration that had grounded it. The tail rotor operated smoothly, the main rotor tracked properly, and all systems showed normal operation. But the real test would come during flight operations. Sarah Mitchell was assigned to conduct the test flight, a responsibility she accepted with mixed emotions. She trusted Tom's expertise, but she also understood that she would be risking her life on modifications that existed nowhere in the official maintenance procedures. As she strapped into the pilot's seat, Tom walked around the aircraft one final time, running his hands along the surfaces and listening to the subtle sounds that indicated whether the mechanical systems were truly in harmony. Everything felt right, but helicopter maintenance was an unforgiving discipline where feeling right had to be backed up by flawless performance. "Take her up slowly," Tom advised over the radio as Sarah began the startup sequence. "Pay attention to any changes in vibration or handling characteristics. If anything feels wrong, bring her down immediately." The Apache lifted off Chapman's flight line like a machine reborn. The vibrations that had plagued it for weeks were gone, replaced by the smooth, powerful operation that made the AH-64 one of the most effective attack helicopters ever built. Sarah flew a careful test pattern, gradually increasing speed and maneuvering intensity as her confidence in the repairs grew. "She's flying like new," Sarah reported after 30 minutes of flight testing. "Better than new, actually. I can't detect any abnormal vibrations or handling problems." But Tom knew that the real test would come over the following days and weeks. Harmonic problems could be subtle and intermittent, appearing only under specific operating conditions or after extended periods of operation. The Apache would need to prove itself in actual combat missions before he could consider the problem truly solved. As the helicopter landed and Sarah shut down the engines, Tom felt the satisfaction that came from solving a problem that had stumped everyone else. But he also understood that his work was just beginning. Training the base maintenance team to understand and maintain the modifications would be crucial for long-term success. The radio crackled to life at 0347 hours with the urgency that every soldier at Forward Operating Base Chapman had been dreading. "Chapman Base, this is Bravo Team 6. We're taking heavy fire from fortified positions in the Cunard Valley. Request immediate close air support. Multiple casualties, urgent medical evacuation required." Colonel Harrison was in the Tactical Operations Center within minutes, assessing the situation with his staff. Bravo Team 6 was a 12-man patrol that had been conducting a reconnaissance mission in one of the most dangerous areas of their operational zone. Intelligence had suggested possible Taliban activity in the valley, but the patrol had walked into a carefully planned ambush involving at least 30 enemy fighters. "Where's our nearest air support?" Harrison asked his operations officer. "Sir, the closest Apache is at FOB Shank, 45 minutes away. They're currently refueling from a previous mission. FOB Salerno has a bird available, but they're dealing with another contact 60 kilometers south of our position." Harrison looked at the tactical display showing Bravo Team 6 location. The soldiers were pinned down in terrain that offered limited cover, and the enemy had positioned themselves in elevated positions that commanded excellent fields of fire. Without immediate air support, the patrol faced the very real possibility of being overrun. "What about our Apache?" Harrison asked, although he already knew the answer. "How confident are we in Master Sergeant Kowalski's repairs?" The question hung in the air for several seconds. Tom's modifications had restored the helicopter's mechanical function, but the repairs had been tested for only 3 days under controlled conditions. Nobody knew how the aircraft would perform during the stress of actual combat operations. Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Mitchell had been monitoring the radio traffic from the pilot-ready room. She understood the tactical situation as well as anyone on the base, and she knew that her Apache represented the only immediate hope for the soldiers trapped in the valley. "Sir, I'm ready to fly," she announced, entering the operations center still pulling on her flight gear. "The bird's been performing perfectly since Master Sergeant Kowalski completed the repairs. I'm confident she can handle a combat mission." Tom Kowalski had also been awakened by the emergency alert, and he was already conducting a pre-flight inspection of the Apache when Sarah arrived at the flight line. His experienced hands moved quickly over the critical systems, checking for any signs that the previous day's operations had created new problems. "How's she looking?" Sarah asked, beginning her own pilot pre-flight procedures. "All systems check normal," Tom replied. "The harmonic modifications are holding steady, and I don't detect any unusual vibrations or mechanical issues. But, Sarah, I want you to understand that we're operating in uncharted territory here. These modifications haven't been tested under combat stress." Sarah nodded grimly. "Master Sergeant, those soldiers don't have time for extended testing protocols. Sometimes you have to trust your work and hope for the best." Within 15 minutes, the Apache was airborne and heading toward the Cunard Valley at maximum speed. Tom had insisted on monitoring the flight from the Tactical Operations Center, using radio communications to track any mechanical issues that might develop during high-stress maneuvering. The flight to the contact area took 12 minutes, during which Sarah pushed the aircraft harder than she had during any of the test flights. The Apache responded flawlessly, its engines delivering full power without any of the vibration problems that had grounded it for nearly a month. "Chapman Base, this is Apache 77. I'm approaching the contact area and can see muzzle flashes from enemy positions," Sarah reported over the radio. "Bravo Team 6, can you mark your position with smoke? The ground combat was intense and chaotic. Bravo Team 6 was spread across approximately 200 meters of rocky terrain, taking cover behind boulders and in shallow depressions while enemy fighters fired from fortified positions on the surrounding ridges. The Taliban had chosen their ambush site carefully, creating overlapping fields of fire that made movement in any direction extremely dangerous. Apache 77, this is Bravo 6 actual. We're marked with green smoke. Enemy positions are concentrated on the ridgeline to our north and east. We have 3 wounded who need immediate evacuation, but we can't move until you suppress those fighting positions. Sarah began her attack run with the precision that had made her one of Chapman's most effective pilots. The Apache's 30mm chain gun engaged the enemy positions with devastating accuracy, while Hellfire missiles eliminated the most threatening targets. But the attack required aggressive maneuvering through mountainous terrain at low altitude, exactly the kind of stress that could reveal hidden mechanical problems. Tom monitored every radio transmission, listening for any indication that the aircraft was developing problems. The harmonic modifications he had made were designed to eliminate the vibration issues, but combat maneuvering created forces and stresses that couldn't be duplicated during ground testing. Chapman Base, Apache 77 is performing flawlessly, Sarah reported during a brief break in the engagement. No mechanical issues, full system functionality. The modifications are holding up perfectly under combat stress. The firefight continued for another 40 minutes as Sarah systematically eliminated the enemy positions that were threatening Bravo Team 6. The Apache's superior firepower and Sarah's skilled flying gradually shifted the tactical balance, allowing the ground team to move to more defensible positions and prepare for medical evacuation. But the most critical test came when a hidden enemy position opened fire with a heavy machine gun, forcing Sarah to execute emergency evasive maneuvers that pushed the aircraft to its performance limits. The Apache twisted and dove through the mountain valleys, pulling G-forces that stressed every mechanical system to its maximum design specifications. Any vibration or handling problems? Tom asked over the radio during the evasive maneuvering. Negative, Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the intensity of the situation. She's flying like a dream. Whatever you did, Master Sergeant, it's working perfectly. The successful completion of the combat mission marked a turning point for Chapman's Apache program. Not only had Tom's repairs restored the aircraft's mechanical function, but they had proven themselves under the most demanding conditions possible. The helicopter that had been grounded for nearly a month was now demonstrating superior performance during actual combat operations. Over the following 2 weeks, the Apache flew 16 more combat missions without experiencing any recurrence of the vibration problems. Sarah and her co-pilot Captain Torres conducted close air support missions, reconnaissance flights, and medical evacuation escorts with complete confidence in their aircraft's mechanical reliability. But Tom understood that his most important work was just beginning. The modifications he had made were highly specialized and couldn't be maintained using standard procedures. If the Apache was going to continue operating reliably, the base maintenance team would need to understand the principles behind the repairs and learn how to monitor and maintain the harmonic balance he had achieved. Sergeant Rodriguez proved to be an eager and capable student. His 20 years of maintenance experience provided an excellent foundation for understanding the advanced concepts that Tom was teaching. Together, they developed a comprehensive training program that would allow Chapman's maintenance team to support the modified Apache without requiring Tom's continued presence. The key is understanding that this aircraft is now tuned like a precision instrument, Tom explained during one of the training sessions. Every component has to maintain exact specifications, and even small deviations can create harmonic problems. You have to think beyond standard maintenance procedures and consider how every change affects the overall system balance. The training program included detailed documentation of all modifications, step-by-step procedures for monitoring harmonic characteristics, and troubleshooting guides for identifying potential problems before they became serious. Tom also worked with the manufacturer's engineering department to develop formal technical bulletins that would allow other Apache operators to benefit from his innovations. Dr. James Chen, who had initially been skeptical of Tom's unconventional approach, became one of the strongest advocates for incorporating harmonic analysis into standard Apache maintenance procedures. What Master Sergeant Kowalski has accomplished represents a fundamental advance in our understanding of helicopter systems integration, Chen wrote in his official report. His methods should be studied and adapted for use across the entire Apache fleet. But, perhaps the most significant validation came from the soldiers who depended on Apache support for their survival. Bravo Team 6, whose members had been rescued during the Apache's first post-repair combat mission, presented Tom with a unit coin and a letter expressing their gratitude for returning their guardian angel to the sky. Master Sergeant, we may never meet face to face, but we want you to know that your expertise saved our lives, the letter read. When we were pinned down in that valley, your Apache was the difference between going home to our families and becoming casualties of war. As Tom prepared to return to his retirement, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him back to Afghanistan. What had started as a mechanical puzzle had evolved into something much more meaningful: the preservation of critical military capability and the protection of soldiers' lives. The Apache continued to fly flawlessly, but, more importantly, Tom had transferred his knowledge to a new generation of maintenance specialists who would carry his innovations forward. Sergeant Rodriguez had already begun training other mechanics in harmonic analysis techniques, creating a legacy that would extend far beyond Tom's brief return to active service. Colonel Harrison organized a farewell ceremony that brought together everyone who had been involved in the Apache restoration project. As Tom stood beside the helicopter that had challenged the best experts in the world, he felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond solving a technical problem. Master Sergeant Kowalski, your work here represents everything that's best about American military expertise, Colonel Harrison said during the ceremony. You've shown us that experience, intuition, and dedication can overcome any challenge, no matter how impossible it might seem. Tom smiled and placed his hand on the Apache's fuselage one final time. The vibrations he felt were smooth and harmonious, exactly as they should be. The machine was healthy again, ready to serve and protect for years to come. But, as he prepared to leave Chapman, Tom knew that his most important contribution wasn't the specific repairs he had made. It was the knowledge he had passed on and the confidence he had restored in the power of human expertise to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. 6 months after Tom Kowalski returned to his lakeside cottage, the Apache he had repaired was still flying combat missions over Afghanistan with perfect mechanical reliability. But the impact of his work had spread far beyond forward operating base Chapman, creating ripples throughout the military aviation community that would transform how helicopter maintenance was conducted for years to come. The technical bulletin that documented Tom's harmonic analysis methods had been distributed to every Apache maintenance facility in the world. Within weeks, maintenance teams at other bases began reporting success in solving previously mysterious vibration problems using Tom's diagnostic techniques. Problems that would have grounded aircraft for weeks or resulted in expensive component replacements were now being resolved in days or hours. Master Sergeant Jennifer Park at FOB Shank was the first to successfully apply Tom's methods to a different aircraft. Her Apache had been experiencing intermittent tail rotor vibrations that appeared randomly and disappeared just as mysteriously, defying all conventional troubleshooting efforts. I read Master Sergeant Kowalski's technical bulletin 3 times before I understood what he was really describing, Park later wrote in her maintenance report. He wasn't just fixing a specific problem. He was teaching us to listen to what helicopters are trying to tell us through vibrations, sounds, and harmonic interactions that our instruments can't measure. Using Tom's harmonic analysis approach, Park identified a resonance interaction between the aircraft's auxiliary power unit and the tail rotor drive system that only occurred under specific atmospheric conditions. The solution required slight modifications to the APU mounting system, changes so subtle that previous maintenance teams had overlooked them entirely. The success at FOB Shank led to formal adoption of Tom's methods by the Army Aviation and Missile Research, Development and Engineering Center. Major Patricia Williams, who had led one of the original expert teams that failed to fix Chapman's Apache, became a strong advocate for incorporating harmonic analysis into standard maintenance training programs. Master Sergeant Kowalski has fundamentally changed how we think about helicopter maintenance, Major Williams explained during a presentation at the Army Aviation Association conference. We've been treating these aircraft like collections of independent systems, but Tom showed us they're actually integrated organisms where every component affects every other component. The manufacturer, impressed by the effectiveness of Tom's innovations, invited him to serve as a consulting engineer for their next generation of Apache development. The company was particularly interested in incorporating harmonic analysis into their original design process, potentially eliminating many vibration problems before aircraft ever reached operational units. But Tom politely declined the lucrative consulting opportunity, choosing instead to remain in his peaceful retirement beside Lake Erie. However, he did agree to conduct occasional training seminars for military maintenance personnel, sharing his knowledge with new generations of mechanics and engineers. The first of these seminars took place at Fort Rucker, Alabama, the Army's primary aviation training center. Over 3 days, Tom taught advanced harmonic analysis techniques to 60 experienced maintenance specialists from around the world. The course combined theoretical knowledge with hands-on practical exercises, giving students real experience in detecting and correcting subtle mechanical problems. Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Mitchell attended that first seminar, eager to learn more about the techniques that had restored her Apache to perfect health. She was amazed to discover that Tom's methods applied to much more than just vibration problems. Master Sergeant Kowalski taught us to understand helicopters as complete systems rather than just collections of parts, Sarah explained to her fellow pilots after returning to Chapman. His approach helps us detect potential problems weeks or months before they become serious enough to ground an aircraft. The seminar was so successful that Fort Rucker immediately incorporated harmonic analysis into their advanced maintenance curriculum. Within 2 years, every Army helicopter mechanic was receiving at least basic training in Tom's diagnostic methods, and specialized courses were being offered for the most experienced technicians. The international aviation community also took notice of Tom's innovations. NATO countries began sending their best helicopter mechanics to Fort Rucker to learn the new techniques, and several foreign manufacturers requested technical exchanges to understand how harmonic analysis could improve their own aircraft designs. Meanwhile, back at Chapman, the Apache continued to demonstrate the long-term effectiveness of Tom's repairs. Sergeant Rodriguez, now promoted to staff sergeant, had become the base's expert in harmonic analysis and was training other mechanics throughout the region. "Every time I work on an aircraft now, I think about what Master Sergeant Kowalski taught us," Rodriguez explained to a visiting maintenance team from FOB Salerno. "You have to listen to the machine, feel what it's telling you, and understand that every vibration has a story to tell." The Apache that Tom had repaired accumulated over 400 combat flight hours without experiencing any recurrence of mechanical problems. More importantly, the maintenance techniques he had developed were being used to keep other aircraft flying when conventional methods would have grounded them indefinitely. Colonel Harrison, promoted to Brigadier General and assigned to the Pentagon, made sure that Tom's contributions were officially recognized at the highest levels of military leadership. Tom received the Secretary of the Army Award for Excellence, one of the highest civilian honors that the military could bestow. Master Sergeant Kowalski's innovative approach to helicopter maintenance has saved countless lives and preserved millions of dollars in military assets, General Harrison wrote in his nomination letter. His willingness to return from retirement and share his expertise represents the best traditions of military service and professional dedication. But the recognition that meant the most to Tom came from an unexpected source. 3 years after his return from Afghanistan, he received a letter from Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a young mechanic who had never met him but had learned his techniques through the Fort Rucker training program. "Dear Master Sergeant Kowalski," the letter began. "I wanted you to know that your harmonic analysis methods saved my crew and my aircraft last month. We were experiencing mysterious vibrations that no one could diagnose, but, using your techniques, I identified a resonance problem that would have led to catastrophic failure within hours. Because of what you taught us, my pilots made it home safely." The letter included a photograph of Staff Sergeant Gonzalez standing beside her Apache with her maintenance team. They were smiling with the satisfaction that comes from successfully solving a complex mechanical problem, the same expression that Tom remembered from his own decades of service. As Tom sat in his favorite chair beside Lake Erie, reading Gonzalez's letter for the third time, he reflected on the unexpected ways that knowledge could spread and influence events far from their origins. His brief return to active duty had been motivated by a desire to solve one specific problem, but the techniques he had developed were now protecting soldiers and aircrews around the world. The fishing was excellent that morning, and Tom caught 3 large bass before the sun climbed high enough to warm the lake surface. As he cleaned his catch, he thought about the parallel between fishing and mechanical diagnosis. Both required patience, careful observation, and the ability to detect subtle clues that might be invisible to less experienced practitioners. Margaret joined him on the dock with 2 cups of coffee, settling into the chair beside him with the contentment that came from sharing a life with someone whose work had made a difference in the world. "Any regrets about coming out of retirement for that last mission?" she asked, watching a pair of eagles circling high above the lake. Tom considered the question carefully. The months he had spent away from home had been stressful and demanding, requiring him to use skills that he had thought were permanently retired. But the knowledge that his expertise was still protecting soldiers and air crews made those sacrifices seem worthwhile. "No regrets at all," he replied finally. "Sometimes experience has to be shared to remain valuable. If I had kept what I knew to myself, it would have been wasted knowledge." The cottage that Tom and Margaret had built for their retirement was filled with mementos from his military career, but the items he valued most were letters from young mechanics and pilots who had benefited from techniques he had developed. Each letter represented lives saved and aircraft preserved through the application of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. As afternoon approached, Tom prepared his fishing gear for another session on the lake. The peaceful routine of retirement had been interrupted once by duty and necessity, but it had returned stronger than before. He had shared what he knew with those who needed it, and now his work was being carried forward by others. The Apache that had brought him back to Afghanistan was still flying combat missions, its mechanical systems operating in perfect harmony thanks to modifications that existed nowhere in any technical manual. More importantly, the principles behind those modifications were being taught to new generations of maintenance specialists who would carry the knowledge forward into an uncertain future. Tom cast his line into the calm water and settled back to wait for the fish to bite. In the distance, a small aircraft was crossing the lake, its engine noise a faint reminder of the mechanical systems that had defined his professional life. But the sound was peaceful rather than urgent, a gentle background to the tranquil retirement that he had earned through decades of service and one final mission that had tested everything he knew about helicopters and the people who flew them. The sun was setting over Lake Erie when Margaret called him in for dinner, but Tom remained on the dock for a few more minutes, watching the last light reflect off the calm water. Tomorrow would bring another peaceful day of fishing and quiet contemplation, but he would always carry the satisfaction of knowing that his expertise had made a difference when it mattered most. The Apache continued to fly, its rotor blades cutting through the thin air above Afghanistan in perfect mechanical harmony, protected by modifications that only one man in the world had been able to conceive and implement. And, in workshops and hangars around the globe, young mechanics were learning to listen to what machines were trying to tell them, carrying forward knowledge that would serve them well in challenges that had not yet been imagined. The master had returned to his well-earned peace, but his legacy lived on in the hands and minds of those who would face the next impossible mechanical puzzle with confidence born of understanding that every problem had a solution if you knew how to look for it.